Jesus Christ was portrayed by Jeffrey Hunter. At one point, millions of people thought they were seeing the Messiah on screen because of his serene demeanor, lovely blue eyes, and elegant features. In King of Kings, 1961, he embodied rather than merely acted. As a result, he was portrayed in the role as the idealized, dignified, and faultless guy. However, Christ was not Jeffrey Hunter. In the end, he died alone in terrible obscurity. Yet he was a man of flesh and blood who shivered backstage under pressure, who tried to maintain fame as the limelight faded. Jeffrey Hunter was once acclaimed as Hollywood's golden kid of the 1950s and 1960s. He co-starred with John Wayne in The Searchers, and was handpicked to play Star Trek's first Enterprise captain. However, those very roles a captain replaced, a foster son on an unending search. A movie savior seemed to hint at his actual destiny, never the one retained on board when it came time to launch, but always close to the center. There at critical times, he collapsed because Hollywood never waits, not because he lacked talent. Jeffrey Hunter's narrative is one of silent tragedy in a world that is both brilliant and cruel, where the brightest lights can also be the ones that exhaust people the most quickly. Remember him? He was just Hank, the sole son of the McKinney's family in New Orleans, before he became Jeffrey Hunter, the famous actor who portrayed Christ in movies. He was born on November 25, 1926, as Henry Herman McKinnis Jr., the product of a relationship between two young University of Arkansas students, Henry Sr. and Edith. A solid future was always their ideal, but times have changed. Jobs were uncertain. So when Hank was 3 years old, the family moved from the pleasant South to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where the hopes of a future star would start to grow despite the hard winters. Hank was the first to stand out in Whitefish Bay. He was more than just an excellent student. He was gregarious, attractive, and a born leader. In addition to being the class president and football team captain, he was also a semi-professional child actress in high school. During the lingering cloud of World War II, Hank's sweet, deep voice warmed the hearts of thousands of listeners on the WTMJ radio program, Those Who Serve in 1945. He also performed with the North Shore Children's Theater and acted in summer plays with local groups. Following his high school graduation, Hank trained in the Great Lakes Naval Station as a volunteer for the Navy. However, Hank's destiny took a different turn just before he was scheduled to deploy to Japan. He became gravely ill and was released in 1946. Disoriented but unwavering, he returned to Milwaukee and enrolled at Northwestern University, where he began his serious exploration of the theater industry. Hank participated in many plays and film clubs. While studying speech at Northwestern, he also worked closely with David Bradley, who would go on to helm Julius Caesar in 1949. He also recognized there that he needed to travel to Hollywood in order to succeed. And with a nameless but dazzling ambition, Hank packed his ambitions, graduated with honors, and made his way directly to California. Like many young men of the day, the moniker Hank McKinney's would vanish a few years later. Instead, Hollywood would recognize him as Jeffrey Hunter and would track the young man's every move as he used to traverse the tiny theater stages in Milwaukee's snow. In the promised land of film, California, Hank McKinnis didn't come expecting to be famous. He was just a UCLA graduate student, just like any other student, presenting plays while studying theater and radio. However, when he participated in a campus production of Arthur Miller's All My Sons one fateful evening in 1950, everything changed. Scouts from 20th Century Fox and Paramount were present that evening. They saw something unique in that young pupil. Striking appearance, a voice that is finely controlled, a presence that is obviously cinematic, and above all, a softness with depth. Hank was asked to a screen test by Paramount, but the contract process was delayed due to internal turmoil. He met Barbara Rush, a young actress who would later become his first wife during that period. Fox jumped in right away and gave him a 9-year contract that would start on June 1950. The formidable head of the studio, Darrell F. After watching Hank's test tape, Zanuck recommended that he change his stage name from Hank McKinnis to something more appropriate for the big screen, Jeffrey Hunter, and suddenly a little-known student was one of Hollywood's most sought-after newcomers in the early 1950s. In 1950, Jeffrey made his uncredited debut in Julius Caesar, which was directed by none other than David Bradley, a former Northwestern acquaintance. Shortly thereafter, he was dispatched to New York to shoot 14 Hours, 1951, which not only acted as his launching pad, but also Grace Kelly's on-screen debut. That was when Hunter really started to get noticed by Hollywood. Jeffrey made appearances in several high-profile commercial films in a short period of time. In 1952, Red Skies of Montana, as a young firefighter. 1953's Sailor of the King. 1956, as a chillingly charismatic student who turned murderer, as a valiant Navy commander, as A Kiss Before Dying. He was more than merely attractive in each role. He was accurate, self-reflective, and not scared to take on challenging characters. Hunter consciously worked to change his image, from that of a soldier, to that of a killer, to that of a young man plagued by duty and conscience. In contrast to many young actors of the era, who were typically cast as romanticized heroes, Jeffrey's personal life began a new chapter in tandem with his burgeoning business. He wed Barbara Rush, a young and gifted actress, at the end of 1950. In the media, the two were portrayed as a fantasy couple, gorgeous, successful, married in Boulder City, Nevada, and negotiating the fast-paced entertainment industry together. However, beneath the glitz was a harsher reality, which Barbara subsequently acknowledged. Any sense of stability is killed by acting. As the first cracks appeared in their marriage, Jeffrey Hunter was entering the pinnacle of his career, and a fate that was already waiting with a turn from which there would be no return. We were working on opposite coasts, away from our little boy, and always saying goodbye just after reuniting. Jeffrey Hunter was chosen to play Martin Pauly in the 1956 Western masterpiece, which was helmed by the renowned John Ford, and starred Americana hero John Wayne. Hunter was the devoted adoptive nephew in the movie, who discreetly accompanied the main character on a year-long mission to save a niece who had been abducted. He didn't play the part of a conventional hero. He wasn't a fiery speaker or the man who took decisive action. However, he was the moral center of the movie, the only person who maintained humanity in the middle of the untamed frontier. Jeffrey wasn't picked at random by John Ford. Hunter delivered through thoughtful eyes, layers of silence, and a character who left a lasting impression without ever pulling a gun. The infamously demanding director once said, "I needed someone who could stand next to John Wayne without being overshadowed, but also without stealing the spotlight. Someone the audience could believe was following not out of weakness, but out of conviction." The career of Hunter took off immediately following The Searchers. His role as Jesus Christ in Samuel Bronston's theological epic King of Kings in 1961 was the next high point. Hollywood was rocked by the decision to choose a 33-year-old actor with matinee idol looks as the Messiah. Some even made fun of the fact that he didn't look like God's son, but rather like George Chakiris from West Side Story. Hunter nevertheless embraced the part with an unusual level of dedication, melancholy eyes, a soft voice, and a kind smile in spite of the criticism. He gave viewers the impression that they were witnessing a very human Christ who was within their grasp. The script was approved before filming started by the Vatican, one of the strictest organizations when it comes to depictions of Christ. Additionally, Hunter's performance was praised rather than derided when it was released. The repercussions, however, were inevitable. Hollywood was at a loss for what to do with him after he became a tip cast member. Too modest to be an action hero in the modern sense, too revered to be a villain. Hunter moved to television in order to avoid becoming a static icon. He obtained a deal with Warner Brothers in 1963 and played the lead in the Western series Temple Houston, which was based on a real-life lawyer. The program was canceled after just 20 episodes. Hunter was paid $5,000 per episode at the time, which was a rather high pay. Star Trek, an odd sci-fi endeavor that few at the time believed in, offered hope for a career comeback. He was chosen to play Captain Christopher Pike in The Cage, the original pilot, in 1964. Jeffrey's acting approach complemented the character's somber, introspective nature and lack of tolerance for humor. Hunter, however, refused to return. When NBC asked for a second pilot, he was insulted to be asked to start over, and didn't think the program would work. His career's worst choice was that one. Ultimately, Sean Kenny was cast in a few sequences as Pike, and William Shatner, who ultimately played Captain Kirk, was cast in the captain's chair. The rest is television history. Star Trek became a worldwide cultural phenomenon. By that point, Jeffrey Hunter had gone on to work on overseas productions and movies, so he was only able to observe from a distance, much like someone who had once boarded a ship only to turn back right before takeoff. The apex was over. What came next was the faint echo of a once bright period of time subtly vanishing, rather than the dazzling brightness of renown. Jeffrey Hunter was a lonely guy who longed for connection, but was continuously drawn away by the very career he had chosen. Despite his chiseled features and the glowing warmth of his saintly portrayals. Actress Barbara Rush appeared to be the ideal Hollywood match for his first marriage. Two up-and-coming talents, both heavily supported by their production companies. They were married in a low-key ceremony in Boulder City, Nevada, at the end of 1950. The media, however, referred to it as the newest dream on the silver screen. Their first happiness and, eventually, their last relationship came 3 years later, when they welcomed a boy called Christopher. However, the fast-paced nature of an acting profession was too much for love to handle. Working on different coasts, Jeffrey and Barbara were frequently separated for months at a time. Barbara subsequently remembered in an interview, "We'd drop our son off with his grandmother, and then say goodbye at the airport, not knowing when we'd see each other again. He was the most beautiful man I ever knew, and he was also beautiful in spirit." They divorced in 1955 after more than 4 years of dating and a few brief separations. But Barbara always spoke of him with respect and affection. 2 years later, Jeffrey married his second wife, Joan Dusty Bartlett, who had previously worked as a stunt double and model for Virginia Leith. When he first met Dusty, he was drawn to her strength, her free spirit, and her love for family. He married her in 1957 and adopted Steele, her son from a previous relationship, and they had 2 more sons, Todd born 1959 and Scott born 1962. This was the time when Jeffrey truly lived as a father and the closest he had ever been to what he most desired, a real family. But Hollywood never lets perfection linger. As his career waned, he started taking roles in foreign films, shooting in Europe and Mexico, spending longer periods of time away from home, under mounting financial and emotional strain. He can be seen playing with his kids in the yard, or quietly reading a script, while Dusty plays the piano in rare surviving photographs. After almost 10 years together, Jeffrey and Dusty announced their divorce in 1967, without any public controversy or repercussions. They tried, but time was not on their side, and Jeffrey withdrew from the spotlight, rarely attending industry events and appearing in the media. Just 3 months before his death, on February 4, 1969, Jeffrey married Emily McLaughlin, a longtime actress on the soap opera General Hospital, in a modest ceremony in Ensenada, Mexico. He didn't let himself open up again until early 1969, when he met her at a party in Beverly Hills, spoke until dawn, and never left her. The beginning of the home Jeffrey had always desired was marked by Emily's invitation of her son, Robert Lansing, Jr., to be best man. However, fate offered him no more opportunities this time. From the quiet Emily to the strong Dusty to the gentle Barbara, each of the 3 women in Jeffrey's life gave him a piece of what he had always desired: a home, peace, and a place to belong. A few weeks after his wedding in November 1968, Jeffrey Hunter flew to Spain to work on a low-budget film project called Viva America, later renamed Cry Chicago, a mafia film about Chicago's underworld that no one anticipated would be a hit. His private life, however, was a journey of love that was never fully realized, much like his on-screen roles, which were always unfinished and always stood just outside the spotlight. That day, during a scene involving a special effects explosion, Jeffrey was sitting in a car that was set up to simulate gunfire with glass that was meant to burst outward. At 42, with Hollywood's glow long gone, Jeffrey had only one drive left: to keep acting, to keep existing as an actor, even on distant sets, even for far less than he once earned 10 years earlier. However, a critical technical error caused the blast direction to be reversed, and the glass shattered directly into his face, knocking him unconscious on the spot. He was taken to a nearby hospital with severe brain damage, deep facial cuts, and heavy bruises. His newlywed wife, Emily, flew in from the United States to care for him, and she later recalled with sadness that Jeffrey was unable to move or speak. Once in the United States, doctors discovered no immediate intracranial bleeding, only a minor misalignment in his cervical spine and a concussion, and then discharged him with the advice to rest. However, he slipped into a state of neurological shock on the flight back to Los Angeles after his discharge, becoming almost unresponsive. The blast caused neurological damage that went beyond superficial symptoms, including sudden disorientation, splitting headaches, unexpected limb weakness, and worsening memory gaps. These symptoms were unsettling for a man who used to memorize scripts after just one read, but was now forced to repeatedly scan his lines. In the midst of all of this, no studio accepted responsibility. No insurance company recognized the long-term damage. And Hollywood, the same industry that once praised him for portraying Christ, became silent. No reporters reported on the accident, no medical bulletins were issued, and Jeffrey Hunter, a man with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, became just another sick, unemployed, and forgotten person. When his former co-star Jack Elam reached out to give him a position in a forthcoming series, A Band of Brothers, a glimmer of hope surfaced. He and Emily returned to a small apartment in Van Nuys, lived quietly, rarely went out, and tried to get strong enough to take on a new role. The explosion didn't just shatter the windshield, it shattered the rest of Jeffrey Hunter's life. Hollywood, the same place that had created him, also silently watched him fade into darkness, as if he had never existed at all. Jeffrey Hunter, however, never made it to the audition, and would never again set foot on a movie set. Jeffrey Hunter, his wife Emily, was busy practicing on set on the afternoon of May 26, 1969 in a small house in the quiet Van Nuys neighborhood of Los Angeles. That evening, they planned to have dinner with old friends, actor Jack Elam and his wife, as a quiet celebration of Hunter's potential comeback to the screen in the upcoming film, A Band of Brothers. While descending a small staircase from the living room to his study, Jeffrey was struck by an acute cerebral hemorrhage, a delayed consequence of the onset explosion months earlier. It was a small part, not particularly significant, but for Hunter at that moment, simply being in front of the camera again was enough. No one heard the cries or saw him fall, but the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the window illuminated the body of a man who had once played the role of the Son of God. Now lying silent and growing cold on the floor, he collapsed, hitting his head hard against the wooden railing and lying motionless between two steps. Jeffrey was still conscious when he was helped into a chair and was able to call Emily, but by the time she returned, he had fallen into a deep coma. The gardener arrived a few hours later, looked through the window, and saw Jeffrey curled up on the wooden floor. He was taken to Valley Presbyterian Hospital by ambulance, where he had emergency surgery to relieve pressure from the intracranial bleeding. But it was too late. Jeffrey Hunter, 42, passed away at 9:30 a.m. on May 27, 1969. His funeral was held on May 31 at Episcopal Street, and his death came as quietly as his career had once faded from the spotlight. No cameras rolled, no lines were spoken, and no director called cut. His body was laid to rest at Glen Haven Memorial Park in Siller, California, a peaceful resting place without a grand headstone or monument, just a flat patch of earth marked with a small inscription of his name and date of passing. No major newspaper ran a dedicated obituary. Mark's Church and Street, Lewis, the very place where he had once been a dreamy-eyed choir boy, a man who once played Christ, who once shared the screen with John Wayne, the original captain of Star Trek, died as if he had never been born. No studio sent flowers, no memorial service was held in Hollywood, and within a day, the news of his passing was overshadowed by headlines about politics, scandals, and the newest stars. Jeffrey Hunter did not leave behind a vast estate, including charitable foundations, multi-million-dollar mansions, scandalous past, or sprawling filmography. While some people die and the world mourns them, others, like Jeffrey Hunter, die behind four walls, sent off by a few brief obituaries, and the unending silence of an industry to which they gave everything. In just over 2 decades of devoted work, he left behind unforgettable images and a quiet, elegant symbol of a golden age in American cinema, when quiet introspection, expressive eyes, and calm elegance were more prized than explosions and special effects. He didn't have a golden Oscar statue or a shelf full of prestigious awards. His portrayal of Martin Pauly became cinematic history, the quintessential quiet American, gentle, patient, and dignified, without needing to command attention. He was the moral soul in the midst of Texas's violent deserts, a character that audiences couldn't take their eyes off, despite the fact that he wasn't the main focus of the searchers. Hunter, whose image, with its deep blue eyes and windswept hair under the simulated Galilean sun, remains one of the most moving cinematic depictions of Jesus Christ in the 20th century, defied early criticism that he was too handsome to play Christ in King of Kings. Hunter delivered a savior full of humanity, gentleness, and approachability, in contrast to the solemn, distant portrayals that had preceded him. As Captain Christopher Pike in the original Star Trek pilot, Jeffrey Hunter made a lasting impression despite his short tenure, laying the groundwork for a decades-long universe. True fans still call Hunter Pike the archetypal captain, more dignified, calm, and profound than his flamboyant successors. His career wasn't as groundbreaking as Paul Newman's or as blazing as Marlon Brando's, But off-screen he embodied a kind of leading man that is almost extinct in today's Hollywood. Handsome, but not distant. Famous, but not superficial. Striking in appearance, but unwilling to compromise his integrity to stay in the spotlight. Although his name is rarely mentioned today, it always reappears subtly but reverently during reruns of The Searchers on Easter Sundays, when King of Kings returns to television, or in discussions about which Captain Pike was the best. Jeffrey Hunter, however, was evidence of a time when acting meant being fully present, without excess, without pretense. Not loud, not immortalized in headlines, but still alive in the memories of those he once touched, with sincerity and grace, and perhaps that is precisely why he deserves to be remembered more than Hollywood ever permitted. Have you ever seen Jeffrey Hunter in a movie? Do you believe that a man who once portrayed Christ and lived as a kind and decent soul deserves a more honored place in the history of cinema? If you still remember Jeffrey, please share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next exciting untold stories of the legends you love. Hunter, and whether a character he portrayed or the man behind it ever had a mark on you.